The alarm tore through the station before I even understood what was happening. Red light bathed the concourse. 300 beings were screaming and running in every direction, and I was running with them, my hearts pounding in ways they had never pounded before in 400 surveys across 9 star systems. My name is Vexthal Ombrin. I am an observer. I have spent my whole life watching other species from a careful distance, writing reports, staying safe. That day, safety was not an option for anyone standing in that concourse, because something had gone catastrophically wrong, and it was small, and it was glowing, and it was alone. The egg had not been on any manifest. Nobody knew it was on the station until it cracked open right there in the middle of the family concourse, spilling shell fragments across the polished floor. What emerged was a hatchling of the Draconis, a species so rare and so protected that most beings in the galaxy had only seen pictures of them. This one was the size of a large dog, all trembling wings and wide, frightened eyes, and it had just been born into the worst possible moment of its life. Draconis hatchlings do not know their own strength. Their bodies carry glands that release raw heat, plasma hot enough to melt metal, and in infancy they cannot control it. When they are frightened, when they feel alone, when everyone around them turns and flees, the fear itself triggers the glow. It is not a weapon. It is an accident waiting to happen, a reflex the baby cannot stop any more than a human infant can stop crying. And everyone was fleeing. That is the part I need you to understand. Every species on that station, every one of us with our advanced sensors and our evolutionary instincts sharpened over millions of years, looked at that trembling baby and understood exactly what was coming. Security drones locked onto it and froze, calculating, because a full release at that distance would have gutted the entire concourse and everyone in it. There was no clean answer. There was no way to grab the baby without triggering exactly the disaster we were trying to avoid. So we ran. I ran too. I am not ashamed to admit that. My instincts, older than my mind, screamed at me to put distance between myself and that glowing shape, and I obeyed them, the same as every other creature in that hallway. That is when I saw her. She was a human child, small even for her own small species, wearing a yellow shirt with a picture of some cartoon animal on it. Her mother had been holding her hand a moment before, but in the crush of bodies the small fingers had slipped free, and now the girl stood alone in the open space between the fleeing crowd and the hatchling. She was not running. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it is important. I felt certain I was about to watch a child die. I had seen enough disasters in my career to know how they usually end, and every part of my training told me this would be the same. A creature that size, panicking, glowing brighter by the second, and a small unarmored child walking straight toward it instead of away. Her mother's voice cut through the chaos. I do not know the woman's name, but I remember her scream perfectly, because it was the sound every parent makes in every language when their child walks toward danger with open arms. It is a sound that does not need translation. The girl kept walking. The hatchling reared back as she approached, its small wings flaring out, the plasma sac in its throat glowing a deep orange now, building toward release. Every model I had ever built in my career told me this was the point of no return. There is no coming back from that stage. I had read the reports. I had studied the incidents. Nothing stops a hatchling once the glow reaches that shade of orange. And then the human child reached up on her toes, put her small hands on either side of the creature's snout, and pressed her face gently against it. "Hello, baby," she said. Her voice was soft, unsteady the way small children speak, but warm in a way that carried even through the noise of the alarms. "You are okay. You are okay." The glow died. I have replayed the recording of that moment more times than I can count. I still do not fully understand it. Every study I have ever conducted said that a frightened Draconis hatchling responds only to more fear, more retreat, more distance. Nothing in 100 years of documented cases suggested that a creature could walk toward it and simply turn the fear off with a few soft words and a small warm hand. But that is what happened. The orange light faded from the hatchling's throat like a candle being gently pinched out. It made a sound I had never heard from a Draconis before, low and confused, almost pleased, the way a lost creature sounds when it finally finds something familiar in a strange place. It pressed its snout into the girl's palm, the way certain other species nuzzle when they feel safe. She laughed. A real laugh, bright and unguarded, the kind of laugh only small children seem to have anymore. And she patted the hatchling's nose like it was nothing more than a very warm dog that had wandered too far from home. Her mother reached her a few seconds later, sobbing, scooping the girl up into her arms and holding her so tightly, I worried for a moment she might not let go. But the hatchling, suddenly separated from the one creature in the room who had not run from it, made a sound so full of loss that even the security officers, still frozen at the edge of the concourse with their weapons half raised, lowered them without being told to. Nobody could listen to that sound and keep pointing a weapon at its source. I filed my report that night, though report does not feel like the right word for what I wrote. In 400 surveys, I had never once needed a category for what I witnessed, so I had to invent one. Threat response, none observed. Outcome, unexplained. Recommendation, further study required. But the story did not end with my report. I stayed on the station for the following days, because I could not make myself leave until I understood what I had seen. And what I learned changed the way I think about an entire species. The conservation officers arrived within the hour to collect the hatchling and transport it back to a proper facility, where trained handlers could care for it. This is standard procedure and nobody argued with it. The problem was that the hatchling would not stop reaching toward the little girl, extending its neck toward her every time she was carried past, making that same low, mournful sound. Her mother, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that still shook slightly from the fright of the last hour, turned back around. "Fine," she said. "5 more minutes. But somebody get this thing a name, because it clearly already thinks it has one." I watched the conservation officer, a tall Draconis handler named Corvin Ask, kneel down beside the two of them, with an expression I can only describe as deeply unsettled. His species had spent generations studying their own young, and nothing in his training had prepared him for this. He asked the mother her daughter's name. "Ivy," the mother said. "Ivy Marsh." Corvin looked at the hatchling, who had settled its small head into Ivy's lap as if it belonged there, and let out a long breath. "We will call her Ember," he said finally, "since apparently she already has a family." That was how it started, not with a grand announcement, not with any scientific breakthrough, just a tired mother, a curious handler, and a small girl who did not seem to understand that she had done anything unusual at all. Over the following weeks, word of what happened spread through the station and then through the wider network of scientific outposts scattered across our sector. Reports came in from every species who had witnessed it, each one struggling to explain the same simple fact. A human child with no training, no weapons, no special abilities that any of our instruments could detect, had walked toward a creature every other sentient being in the galaxy had learned to fear, and the creature had responded not with more aggression, but with something that looked remarkably like relief. I began interviewing every human I could find on the station, trying to understand what made their species different. Most of them found the question strange. A man named Oliver Grant, who worked in the station's cargo bay, laughed when I asked him why humans do not run from danger the way other species do. "We run plenty," he told me. "Trust me, most of us are terrified most of the time. But kids, especially really young ones, they have not learned to be afraid of the right things yet." Ivy did not see a monster. She saw a baby who was scared and alone, because that is what was actually there. That explanation did not satisfy me at first. Fear is fear, and every species I had studied learned quickly what to be afraid of and why. But the more humans I spoke with, the more I began to understand that something in their early development kept a strange kind of openness alive longer than in most species. A young Vulpethian learns within days of birth which predators to avoid. A young Krail is taught the shape of every dangerous creature in its home forest before it can walk. Human children, by comparison, seem to arrive in the world almost stubbornly unafraid, and it takes years of careful teaching to convince them which things deserve caution. Somewhere in that gap, between being born and being taught, a human child like Ivy Marsh can look at a glowing, trembling, dangerous creature and see only a baby who needs comfort. I do not think this makes humans reckless, though many of my colleagues use that word in their own reports. I think it revealed something we had never properly studied, because we had never had the opportunity to see it in action. Humans are not fearless. I watched grown men and women on that station scream and run just as fast as anyone else when the alarm sounded. But somewhere inside their species, tucked away and protected by the strange innocence of early childhood, there remains a kind of courage that the rest of us lose too quickly, buried under generations of learned caution. Ember, the hatchling, was eventually transported to a proper Draconis nursery facility 3 systems away, where trained handlers of her own species could raise her safely. I expected that to be the end of the story, a strange and touching incident filed away in my records and mostly forgotten. It was not the end. 6 months later, I received a message from Corvin Ask, the handler who had named her. He wanted me to know that Ember had grown considerably, as Draconis hatchlings do, and that she had developed what he called an unusual temperament for her species. Where most young Draconis remained cautious and easily startled well into their 2nd year, Ember showed almost none of that anxiety. She approached new situations with a calmness the nursery staff found remarkable. Corvin believed, though he admitted he could not prove it scientifically, that the first moments of a creature's life shape something deep and lasting within it. Ember's earliest memory, whatever a creature that young could actually remember, might have been the feeling of a small warm hand and a soft voice telling her she was safe, instead of the screaming and fleeing crowd that surrounded her on every other side. He wondered if that single moment of kindness had done more to calm her than a year of careful handling might have. I found myself wanting to believe him, and I still do. The story did not stay contained to that one station either. Within a year, similar incidents began appearing in reports from other outposts, though never anything quite as dramatic as what happened with Ivy and Ember. A human toddler on a transport ship reached out to calm a frightened Krail pup that had become separated from its pack, something the pup's own species considered nearly impossible given how skittish young Krail are around unfamiliar creatures. A small human girl on a research colony spent an afternoon sitting quietly beside an injured Vulpethian kit, humming some simple tune until the animal's panicked breathing slowed and it finally allowed the colony's medical staff to approach. None of these children had any special training. None of them understood, in any way we could measure, why their presence calmed frightened creatures that every other species avoided on instinct. They simply walked toward the fear instead of away from it, and somehow, more often than statistics said it should, the fear responded by softening. I began to think of it as something the wider galaxy had never properly noticed, because we had never given ourselves the chance. Every other species I had studied kept its young carefully protected, sheltered from any situation that might be considered even slightly dangerous. Humans, whether through carelessness or trust, or simply because their own history had taught them that some risks are worth taking, allowed their children a kind of freedom the rest of us found difficult to understand, and in that freedom, something unexpected kept happening. Small, soft, unarmored children kept walking toward frightened creatures and offering comfort instead of running. I do not want to suggest that this always ended well. I read reports, later, of situations where a child's approach did not calm a frightened animal, where caution would have served everyone better, and I want to be honest that courage and recklessness are not always easy to separate from a distance. But in case after case that I personally reviewed, something in that simple, unafraid kindness worked in a way that our careful, cautious, well-trained approaches had not. 2 years after the incident on the station, I traveled to the Draconis nursery facility myself, curious to see Ember again, and to understand what had become of her. Corvin met me at the entrance, older now, though his enthusiasm for his work had not dimmed at all. He led me through corridors lined with young Draconis of various ages, most of them watching me with the wary, careful eyes I had come to expect from their species. Ember was different immediately. She was larger now, her scales a deep green that would eventually darken as she matured, and when she saw us approaching she did not flinch or retreat the way the others did. She simply watched us with what I can only describe as curiosity, the same open expression I remembered from that day in the concourse, though now belonging to a creature many times the size of the hatchling I had first seen. Corvin told me she had become something of an unofficial ambassador for the nursery, calm enough around visitors of unfamiliar species that the staff sometimes brought her out to meet new arrivals who might otherwise have been frightened by the sight of a Draconis for the first time. It seemed a strange kind of gift to receive from what had been, on the day she hatched, the single most dangerous creature in that entire station. I asked Corvin if he had ever told Ember about Ivy, and he laughed, reminding me gently that Draconis hatchlings do not retain detailed memories from infancy any more than most species do. But he said something that stayed with me long after I left that facility. He said that whether or not Ember remembered the specific moment, some part of what happened that day had shaped her, the same way our earliest experiences shape all of us, whether we can recall them clearly or not. I never learned what became of Ivy Marsh, whether she grew up remembering the strange dragon she had calmed as a small child, whether her parents ever told her the full story, or whether it simply became one of those half-remembered pieces of childhood that fade with time. I like to imagine that somewhere, she is now a young woman going about her life, unaware that a creature many systems away carries a small piece of the kindness she offered without a second thought. I have spent my entire career studying what allows different species to survive in a dangerous universe. I have written reports on claws and defenses, on speed and camouflage, on every advantage evolution has carved into the beings I have studied. Never once, before that day on the station, did I consider that simple, uncalculated kindness might itself be a kind of strength, one that the rest of us, wrapped in generations of careful caution, had somehow allowed ourselves to forget. I do not know if every human child would have done what Ivy did that day. I suspect, honestly, that most would not have. That fear works on humans the same way it works on the rest of us in most situations. But something in that particular child, in that particular moment, reached past every instinct that should have sent her running, and found instead a frightened baby who simply needed to know it was not alone. I have filed hundreds of reports across my career, each one carefully categorized, each one fitting neatly into the frameworks I had built over years of careful study. This is the only one I could not force into a tidy category. I tried, for a long time, to explain it away as an unusual exception, a single moment that meant nothing beyond itself. I no longer believe that. I believe it meant something important, something about courage that has nothing to do with size or strength or weapons, something the rest of the galaxy might do well to notice. A small child walked toward the one thing every other creature in that concourse had learned to fear, and in doing so, she did not just save a room full of frightened beings from disaster. She showed all of us, in the span of a few short seconds, that the bravest thing a person can do is sometimes the simplest. Stay, reach out, offer comfort instead of distance. I still think about that day more than I think about almost anything else I have witnessed in my long career. I think about the sound of Ivy's mother screaming, about the orange glow fading from a frightened creature's throat, about a small warm hand pressed against scaled skin, and a voice too young to know it was doing anything remarkable at all, simply saying, "You are okay, over and over," until it became true.